Hi, everyone. Welcome back to This is Bipolar. We are so glad you're here. Before we get started, I want to let you know that I have peer support on Instagram. And what that looks like is a subscription. And when you subscribe, you get added to a chat. We are on there daily. There are people from all over the world, and we are just sharing and supporting each other. And we also meet on Zoom once a month, which has been a really beautiful experience just to see the faces and hear the stories and ideas of people that actually live with mood disorders like ourselves. And so, if that sounds like something that you might need, go to my Instagram at this.is.bipolar and sign up for subscription, and I can get you hooked up with all of those things. All right. If you haven't been here before, my name is Shaley Hoogendoorn. I live with bipolar 2 disorder. I am a mom. I am a wife. I am also an elementary school substitute teacher, and I am a mental illness advocate. And I have here my reoccurring guest co-host slash friend slash brilliant person, Andrea, who will introduce herself.
Hi, thank you, Shaley. My name's Andrea Vasilev. I am a doctor of psychology. I am a therapist. I am a mental health advocate. And most importantly, I am someone who has lived with bipolar for almost 30 years now. Oh my gosh. I feel like every time we record, I have to up that number a little bit.
Yeah, right? You're like, oh, time changes. There's
Yeah.
more years.
hmm
That's amazing. Well, today, my friends, we are recording on the last day of February. It will come out in March, but I know this month on Instagram and with my support group, we have been talking a lot about relationships. A lot of big feelings come up in February because of the consumerism idea that
hmm
is Valentine's. And so we thought that we would talk today about some personal experiences with relationships and how living with bipolar disorder affects those relationships. And so we are excited to share this because I think that people carry, a lot of shame. Sometimes we lose friends. I just think it's a really important topic to talk about because it is such an added struggle for us.
Yep.
So, Andrea, where should we start?
Well, I just want to say that I think people might be a little apprehensive, thinking, oh my gosh, relationships. I've really struggled with relationships. I'm
Yeah.
never going to find someone. It's hard to get along with my family. And it can seem like doom and gloom. And I think something that you and I probably want to highlight is that the struggle is real,
Yep.
as we say, right? But that there are ways to cope and that there are positive, healthy, meaningful relationships to be had. So do not
Yeah.
despair.
Yeah, especially if you're listening to this, one of the questions I get all the time is, can I have a healthy relationship? Can I get married? Am I destined to be alone? And will
Mhm.
it be extra hard? Yes. Right? Especially if it's not managed and there isn't some sort of treatment plan. So thank you for saying that. Yes. And I also want to recognize that we have a certain experience. And so there's going to be future podcasts with different experiences. So, with that being said, do we want to start with romantic relationships?
Sure. So I think today we're going to cover sort of our personal experiences, right? And then
Yep.
maybe we can loop back in another episode and talk about tips,
Tips. Yes, we're
coping,
definitely going to
etc.
do that. That's the questions we're going to get. Today, we're
Yeah.
going to lay it all out there. What are common problems? What are problems we've had? And then our next episode, we're going to talk about tips, tricks. Those that makes it sound like kind of
Like we have all the answers.
yeah, one with all the answers and we tips and tricks managing that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Ones that we use ourselves and ones that I aspire to use but are very difficult. So watch for that. It will come
Yes,
out after this.
definitely. So I think relationships covers many things, romantic, friends, family, but I think there are some sort of golden threads that go through all of those,
Yes.
right? So in any relationship, let's do some general stuff. In any relationship, what are the changes you notice in your
Mhm.
behavior that impact your relationships in terms of
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. So I think I'll start out with depression just because, as Andrea and I were talking just before we started here,
yeah.
how that's an added struggle. for those of us that live with a mood disorder, because it isn't just one. Because you aren't just depressed, because we
Right.
experience depressive episodes, we experience euthymia, another fancy word for symptom free, and hypomania or mania. So,
Or mixed states.
or mixed states, right?
Mm,
That's a double whammy there. But so I will start with depression because when I'm depressed, it affects my relationships much differently. So I am married, and I was not diagnosed till I was 32 years old. So when I look back, I always felt different and weird and like I had too big of emotions.
mm,
And so that made me very self-conscious as a teenager. So I had like this image in my mind. If I had a boyfriend, I need to always have a boyfriend, because just the fact that someone picked me and that I had a boyfriend, I felt like that made me look like to the world less different, or you know what I mean? Like it's
sure.
almost like, so therefore I settled for relationships and stayed in relationships and through my high school years and beginning of my 20s that weren't healthy, but I chose the unhealthy
Sure.
over the being alone.
Yeah. So I think that if you're feeling bad because you have bipolar or because your experiences are different from everybody else's or because you take medication and your friends don't, that can kind of chip away at your sense of self. So people might be seeking validation. I mean, we all seek validation. Like, let's be
Right.
honest, bipolar or not, everybody's seeking validation.
Of course.
But if you're seeking more of it, that might be down to how you're feeling about bipolar, like you're describing, Shirley.
Yeah. And I found, if we start with depression, I found that when I would become depressed, um, the relationship would change, and I wasn't fun and new and shiny and
Mm,
what a lot of people that partners that I had signed up for. Because when I talk about hypomania, that's every
me.
single one of my relationships started in that state.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that I would, instead of doing the regular things that I would do with my boyfriends, like go out or do things because I'm very social, I would just want to like sit on the couch with them. I just
Yeah.
wanted to do nothing, but I wanted them to be there, but I wanted to do nothing. And I think that was really hard on relationships because
Yeah, that inconsistency.
yeah, and it's like shocking to them. And all of a sudden, I don't become a great communicator because I'm quiet and everything is gray, and my world gets really, really small. So I would get like hyper focused on not wanting to be alone. And I think that's a lot to put on someone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you when you experience depression? And I was speaking mostly of boyfriends. I'll speak about my partner in a bit, but how about you? How did it affect relationships when you were younger? You were diagnosed very early in your teens.
I was. I was
Yeah.
diagnosed at 14, so in some ways I didn't feel different in the way you felt different because I
Mhm.
knew how I was different, which is just, a different set of circumstances.
Yeah.
But I still felt different. None of my friends took medication. Being in high school, and I missed the first 3 months of high school because I had just gotten diagnosed and I was completely non-functional. Um, So then coming back and having to explain to everybody, it was hard for me to make friends. I remember I only had one friend at that point who I told that I was taking
Yeah.
medicine and what had happened. And she, of course, was also 14 and didn't have any context and was like, all right, that's fine. Right. So she was great. Shout out. Um, but as I went through life, I think that it's the symptoms that got in the way. It wasn't my sense of having bipolar and that being a problem, but like
Mm.
you mentioned, it's the symptoms that got in my way of being able to be a good friend, a good partner, a good, daughter, etc. But that comes and goes as the symptoms come and go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that a partner might feel, and I know with my husband now, feel pretty helpless when I
Mm,
experience depression, because I think, like, as human beings, it's our natural inclination to want to help or fix.
yes.
And there isn't a lot. And I think one of the things that I do is I want encouragement to do the things that are going to help, like the walks like this, but
Hmm.
also I I explain depression like I'm already walking around the world with a sunburn, right? So I'm thinking
Mm.
all the terrible things about myself. I'm vulnerable. I'm already, anything that someone could say that I wasn't doing well at, I've already berated myself with it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
obviously medicated, this is a lot better now, but I'm thinking and I still don't do that well with people really close to me, sometimes telling me things I've done because it's like, it makes all those terrible thoughts. It's like, oh, of course, yeah, it's true, right? And so I walk around with this sunburn, and then this like when my husband tells me something, like I take it all the wrong way. So it's like,
Right.
oh, maybe you should go for a walk, or maybe you should do this. I'm like, you think I suck. You think, don't tell me to do these things. You don't understand how hard it is, right? I get pretty defensive. Do you get
Yes.
defensive when you're depressed?
I mean, you have a great amount of insight and self-awareness that you can sit here and say you get defensive. I don't want to say I don't get defensive because eventually my husband's going to listen to this podcast and he'll laugh at me. But am I aware that I get defensive? Maybe not. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But you make a good point about communication. That is something that can really suffer if you're having bipolar symptoms. If you're experiencing depression, like Shaley just described, it can be hard to hear what people are actually saying. You might put it through the ugly lens of depression and interpret it a different way than it was intended and it was said,
Yeah.
right? If you're experiencing elevation, it can be hard to slow down and hear what other people are saying. You might not
Yeah.
want the reality check that they're giving you. Like, hey, maybe this plan you have isn't a great idea. You don't want to hear that. So you stop listening, and that breaks down communication, right?
Yeah. 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 It really does too, because I also get really needing of reassurance,
Hmm.
which I don't in other states. So I think, even though like my husband is used to it, but I think in the past, and I think I I I just am always like either asking or needing reassurance, or I overread body language. I'm like, oh, they're mad at me. Oh, it's mad at me. Or
Right. Put everything through the distortions.
right? And
Yeah.
through like texts or whatever, normally I'd be like, "Oh, that person's busy. That's why they didn't answer." I was like, "Oh, they're breaking up with me as a friend, and they hate my guts. So there goes that friendship." Meanwhile, like maybe they're had a busy week, right? But I am convinced. And the weirdest thing about that is that even now, medicated therapy, all of those things, it's like I can see that thought outside of me. But the
Mhm.
frustrating thing about depression is I still think it.
Yeah.
Still think it even when I'm, doing
They're
managing. How about you?
they're really loud. Those thoughts are really loud during depression, right? It's very hard to neutralize them and see the logic in them. So all of that impacts communication, right?
Yeah, for sure.
If you're reading into things, assuming things, jumping to conclusions, that's really hard. And that can be frustrating for the partner. So I guess now we're in romantic relationships, right?
Yeah,
So that can be hard for the partner because their method of communicating hasn't changed dramatically, I presume, right?
yeah,
But your method of communicating has, and that can be really hard.
yeah. And even with, and I know I struggle with different ways, and I know that this is, um, can be experienced on different levels, but I find because I'm withdrawn, right? Like the hugs, or like, like just goodbye kisses or things like that. It's almost like I forget to be in contact, right? Like
Mhm.
physical contact. I forget, I could just sit there. I don't think like, oh, come sit beside me, or physical touch. And we know hugs and things like that help. I it's like I forget about all that, and it's needed, right? Like we all need hugs, we know this. And
Mhm.
I think that that can be hard for my partner because generally I'm snuggly, and I'm just kind of on this lone island. How about
Yeah.
you?
I think that's true, although I think when I experience depression, I get more snuggly.
Hmm.
I need more of it, not less of it,
Yeah.
which again speaks to the inconsistency that makes this such a difficult road to navigate,
Yeah.
which it's hard for us, but it's really hard for our partners,
Right.
right? So I just want to sort of that's an elephant in the room, right? Like how hard it is for a partner. And that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you're not worthy of love, and it doesn't mean that you're never going to find love, and it doesn't mean that someone won't love you just as you are. It just means we should be aware of how hard it can be for our partners, because that might motivate us to work towards wellness, to do what we can to mitigate our symptoms, right? To have more self-awareness. That
Yeah.
motivates me anyway, right?
Yeah, same. And I know I try to be, aware of how exhausting it's exhausting for me, but it can be tiring for our partners
Mhm.
because we feel like a bit of whiplash about having going back and forth or just not knowing about what mood might be there. I think it's also whiplashy for them as well because things that help me when I'm depressed, and we'll get into that in the next episode, are very different than things that help me when I am elevated. So,
Right. And you know what I think is confusing, at least for I can only speak from the point of view of my husband, um, is that I don't come with like a sign. I don't wear a sign that says, today I'm feeling slightly elevated. I might not
yeah,
even know, right?
yeah,
Or today I'm experiencing some depression. Like I don't come downstairs in the morning with a sign that says,
yeah,
here's what you're going to get. You just start interacting with the person and you get whatever they're experiencing, right? So if out of nowhere, I'm snappy and irritable,
yeah,
right? He might be confused about what's happening and not automatically link it up to, is she upcycling? Is this ADHD, emotional dysregulation, which is a very real thing?
yeah,
Um, right? And then we have to learn as a unit, as a couple, how to navigate that, how to deal with that. But I think it's hard for them because they don't always know what's coming next. So the more we know, the better we can help them help us.
yeah. And when Andrea says ADHD, she has an actual diagnosis of
Yes.
that. So, and a lot of people have comorbidities, right? Or more diagnoses.
Yeah, a lot of people who with bipolar have ADHD. It's both overdiagnosed and underdiagnosed, but it can happen together. It very much does. And yeah, the emotional dysregulation is very real. That's a thing Shaley and I were talking about last week because it's a thing.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too, we were talking about how you need to be aware. Like it's good to be aware, but there's always this wiggly line that I'm just always trying to find where I'm not stuck in thinking, what is causing this? What is causing this so much
Hmm.
so that I can stop it and eliminate it. Whereas now I try to sit back and deal with the actual feelings and emotions
Right,
instead of always trying to stop it. It's going to move through my body and through my mind
right.
anyways. So it's like this, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I don't love the word balance, but it's like not thinking about it, overthinking it and getting stuck, but yet being aware that you are in those states.
Mindfulness,
Yeah, mindfulness.
noticing and accepting.
Yeah, the accepting part. I can notice. I'm very self-aware, but the acceptance part, that's what I'm working on. So yeah, how does being elevated or hypomania, or mania, how does that affect your romantic relationship?
Well, I think there's going to be a wide range there. I think people listening would agree that, when you're feeling a little elevated and you're super chatty and you want to go out and do stuff and it's great fun, partners probably love that. That probably makes relationships more fun, right?
Yeah.
If you're having some sort of dysphoric mania where you're really irritable and agitated and can't sit still and are yelling and are doing risky things, that's going to make relationships a lot more difficult, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, I mean, personal experiences, you want to hear an embarrassing story?
Always.
Hello out there in podcast land. Here's an embarrassing story. So, once I was elevated, but I was dysphoric elevated, right?
Okay.
So my brain was going really fast and I was having trouble making good decisions and I was really upset and my husband did something and I can't even remember what, which goes to show it really wasn't that big of a deal. And
Yep.
I got really upset and I packed my little suitcase and I got on a trip and I didn't tell him where I was going. I literally ran away like I was a child, right? And then he got really worried and he didn't know where I was because I turned the tracking off on my phone. This is really not one of my finest moments, but
Yeah.
that's a really, we're being raw and vulnerable here. That's a real example of something that happened due to a mood state.
Yeah. Yeah. I can relate to that. I've gone for like long walks or like a drive and I'm like, "Oh, he's gonna miss me," kind of thing.
Yeah, I got
But
on a train, like a 3 hour
yeah.
train.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think too, I get the fun, you know what, the fun side, and we go out more, we do that. But I
Mhm.
think what mine always partners with is some irritability. And so I not only do I talk faster, I'm irritated but people can't keep up. And I'm
Yes.
irritated that they don't think that these things that in my head are of utmost importance and urgent, like get on board. Like, how could this not? This is huge, right? Like, I'll look around, I'll be like, how can you just be having your snack on your computer when this huge thing, needs to be
Right.
dealt with? And
The
also,
urgency.
yeah, the sense of urgency. I read somewhere, I think it was a post, and I read somewhere that it said hypomania or manic ideas aren't suggestions, right? They aren't suggestions, they're instructions or demands.
They're
Like that's
mandates.
what it feels like. Yeah. Yeah. And one of the big things I do with the talking fast, which I become very self-absorbed, and admittedly, I am an interrupter at all states, but
Same.
it
How
feels
are we
like
even doing this podcast?
I know. It feels like if I don't get those thoughts or ideas out,
Hmm.
that like I feel like I'm gonna explode. I'm like itchy or whatever. So I do a lot of interrupting. And unfortunately, that's one of my husband's like, I don't know, pet peeves or things. And so it's really hard for me because I say, yes, that I can work on that because it's important to you. And also because it's a symptom, I get sometimes feeling really defeated because I can't work on it like
Right.
entirely, right? Like
You
it's
can't
not
turn it off.
exactly. And so it's 23 years. It's a thing we always come back to. And same with if you think about it, it's pretty rude to just walk into a room starting talking that he should definitely be interested in what I'm talking about. He explained to me that he's like, when you walk into a room and when people start talking, uh, I can't think my own thoughts. I stop and listen. I'm like, what?
What?
Like, what is this way of being that I don't understand, right? Like, I can tune other people out because I'm so into my thoughts. And I was like,
Right.
wow, that must be really frustrating for him that
Yes.
he's in his thoughts and I'm like, take over.
I do something similar, and I have some of this even at baseline. So some of it may be, just
Same.
bipolar stuff that hangs around even when you're not in an episode, but I will start talking with no context,
Yes.
right? I'll start and I'll go like 4 sentences in, and then my husband will be like, "Oh, okay, now I know what you're talking about, but he
Yeah.
missed the first 4 sentences, and I'm not interested in going back and repeating those sentences. Why wasn't he keeping up?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Rewind, right? That's
right?
what,
So just presuming that everybody, even just subconsciously presuming that everybody else is starting where you're starting and up to speed with you and can
yeah.
keep up. And I trip on my words, and he's like, "I didn't
Yep.
understand what you said." I'm like, "Well, look, listen faster."
Yep. Yep. It can be really, really frustrating. And sometimes like I wake up and I just know it's going to be a difficult day because I just feel like there's not enough apologies for the interrupting that I'm going to do today because I can feel the motor like
Yeah.
in my body. And I find that hard um with friendships as well, because I'm afraid they're going to think that I don't think their ideas are good. And this overlaps with my relationship with my husband and friends, because sometimes I've think so fast. I've thought through all the pros and cons. And so I've come to a conclusion of what I think is the best idea or is going to work the
Mhm.
best, but I haven't let someone else work through it. So as soon as they say something, I'm like, that's not going to work. Like I seem like I'm dismissive or that I don't care
Right.
or that I'm like, all my life I've gotten that I'm bossy, right?
Right.
Do you do that? Like think through a bunch of scenarios and then think you're right, and then other people tell you and you just don't take their suggestions?
I do, and I think that happens in friendships and work relationships. But there's one more thing I want to talk
Yes.
about in romantic relationships,
Yes.
and that's intimacy and
Yes.
hypersexuality. And
Yes.
although maybe we don't share our personal experiences here, I
Yeah.
know that people listening, and I've done posts about this, and people are like, we don't talk about this enough. There's actually a whole line of research that Bipolar UK did, I think it's Dr. Claire Dolman, um, about hypersexuality and bipolar, and like it's very real, and that can be very disruptive to romantic relationships, even if
Yeah.
you're not married, even if you're dating, right?
Yeah.
Especially during like classic manic episodes. There's other things during, I mean, you and I've had one sort of classic manic episode. um
Yeah.
so things like spending lots of money that maybe you don't
Yes.
have as a partnership or in a
Oh, yes, that's very important to bring up. Yeah.
right? So those things that you do that really in that moment are out of your control can be very damaging to a relationship. And I just want to, I want to talk about that for a little, even if you and I
Yeah.
don't have a lot to share about it personally.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I don't talk about it, and I we talked earlier about this because of shame or anything. It's that I am a teacher, and so this is out there on the interwebs. And as much as I
Mhm.
would like to go, I'm an open book. I That's one place that I have to be kind of careful. And so if you think that, we're not going deep into it because we don't think that it's important to talk about, I have some constraints there. And so I have, episodes before where guests speak to that being a part of their life. And I plan to get other people to come on here and speak to that as well. I know that can absolutely blow up relationships. And it's such
For
a
sure.
line because I know someone that lived with bipolar disorder that was like very what they would call themselves like traditional Christian fundamentalist, only been with one person, woman that cheated on her husband, and it was absolutely in an unmedicated manic episode. And so even though like we need to be accountable for our actions, it was something that you know what I mean, that she did there. So
Yeah,
like, how
that's so
does
rough.
one forgive that, and how does one move forward, because it's wasn't really them and yet it's them, so that's so tricky.
Yeah, that is so tricky. It can even happen within a relationship as well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So we just kind of want to hold space for all of that, right?
Yeah.
And same as Shaley, I'm a therapist. I already have a lot about me out there on the internet.
Yeah.
So we're gonna draw some lines around this one.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
see you.
Yeah, we see you, and I definitely will have guests on that can speak to that. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up because that is huge, right? And huge, even intimacy, like in relationships, like when you're depressed, like I said, less wanting to be intimate, and that's hard on a partner for
Yeah.
sure when they,
Yeah.
feel love that way. Yeah,
Again, the inconsistency of it can be very jarring.
yeah.
Um, so if we talk about friendships,
Mm,
I've
yes.
got a song stuck in my head from I Love Lucy.
What? Oh, yeah, you sent it to me.
If anybody knows what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. Friendship, friendship, bum, ba-dum, bum. Anyway, sorry.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. Let's start with you. I'm curious about, so you said you had the one friend, but I imagine I'm curious about like you're figuring yourself out, self of,
Oh, you
personhood.
mean when I was younger?
Yeah, when you were
Okay, I'm like,
younger.
I have more than one friend.
Yeah. No, no, no. When you were younger, you talked about when you just found out. I'm curious
Yeah.
how that followed through during puberty and during your high school years, because I didn't know. So I still operate from this, if I'm not careful to catch the thought, is that I think I like everybody more than they like me.
Hmm.
So I was always yeah, I always thought that they liked me more than them. And I generally would focus, I always wanted like a boyfriend. I always wanted a best friend, like a
Hmm.
best friend. And so I would pour into, even though I was really social, pour into one friend. And I'm pretty sure that I overwhelmed them in the amount of time that I wanted to spend with them. How about you?
Not in high school, but I didn't have that many friends in high school, to be honest.
Mm.
So that wasn't my experience because I just didn't have that many friends in general.
Yeah. Yeah. That was that hard or because you had your one? Did you feel okay? How did you feel inside about that?
Yeah, not great. I mean, can
Yeah.
we interview anybody who looks back and is like, I love high school. It was the greatest.
Right.
Right, I'd
Right.
be hard pressed to find somebody. But no, I mean, I don't was related to bipolar. I didn't have a lot of friends. You know,
Yeah.
a lot of people came into that high school with friends already, and some people were nice, but then I lost my friends from elementary school. So high school was rough, compounded by the fact that I was still dealing with mood swings and taking medications, and then I spent much of my high school time experiencing hypomania, but like nobody noticed. They just thought it was really intense and hardworking. I only slept like 3 hours a night. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, just kind of messy all around.
Yeah, I would make like so many new friends in hypomania, and I was so fun. And I would be like the life of the party. And like I said, that's when relationships would happen because I would have enough confidence to just be like, I think that you should be with me because I'm awesome. And they'd be like, well, you make a good case.
I
But
did have one really good friend in high school who ended up being my boyfriend in high school as well.
oh,
Right. And he was always very supportive. Yeah, he was wonderful.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing. And if you go back and listen to, I kind of didn't bring it up here because it could be like hours, but if you go back and listen to some of the very first episodes, they're called, I think it's like number one or two, and it's called Breakups and Breakdowns. So go listen to
Mm.
that, and you can hear about how I was engaged when I was like 20, 21, and how that person left physically and broke off our relationship. And so I think it's not only the bipolar disorder, I have this, like core wound about being left. Which makes sense with that,
Sure.
compounded with the big feelings, and I think that trickles over into friendships. And I think sometimes, I'm too much for certain people. So I've had friends where like we're best friends for a time, and then not a big blowout happens or anything like that, but you just kind of grow apart. And I had huge friendship breaks when I had my first baby because I had huge, postpartum hypomania, I would call it. And I didn't feel understood. I was the first one to have a baby. I didn't pour into my friendships because it's extra having a kid, right? Like your whole life, and they didn't understand. And I think that I didn't do a good job of keeping up. And I just wanted to be surrounded people that understood that. And so I have regrets there about just pulling way back and seeking out others in that same experience. So
Mm.
there's some guilt there because I think that I bailed on what could have been, deeper friendships.
Right. And I think that that kind of highlights the need for people with bipolar to have other friends with bipolar.
Yeah, right?
Right. That's why your subscriptions are so good. The chat is so good. Support groups are so good. I
Yeah.
have two really close friends with bipolar. You're one of them. Sorry.
Yay.
And I try to meet more people with bipolar, which is interesting because I think two people in a romantic relationship, both of whom have bipolar, could be very difficult. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not
Yeah.
saying, don't follow your heart. Just know that there will be additional
Yeah.
barriers, most likely additional struggles, so to speak. But two friends with bipolar, I find that even though I have some of my best friends in the world who don't have bipolar,
Yeah.
it's a little different. They
It
don't,
is.
they can't get it, and that's not their fault. And I still love them with all my heart and soul. But
Yeah.
having friends with bipolar is something very special.
Yeah. And I didn't have any until like I had like occasional interactions with people online before I started the podcast. But like Julie, who I started the podcast with, was my
Mhm.
first real friend with bipolar disorder. And so that was in 2020 when we kind of became really good friends. So literally, I've only had friends with mood disorders for 4 years, right? And
Oh,
yeah, and so it makes such a difference. And I think that's when it really solidified
Mhm.
in my mind that it was an illness because we had similar things. Because even though I knew all the things, I think there was still some thoughts or probably what would be defined as self-stigma that it was still something wrong with
Yeah,
me until I met other
exactly.
people and I'm like, they experience that too, and it isn't actually a part of who, like, it isn't actually my personality. It isn't
Mhm.
who I am. It's something I experience.
Exactly. You are not your experiences in some ways, right? And I think that's hard, something I've heard people talk about as well as having had experiences when, if you tell a friend, "Oh, I have bipolar," they might say something like, "Oh my gosh, me too. The other day I was so upset." And you don't want to, like, that's misplaced sympathy, right? They're trying to sympathize, they're trying to say, "Me too. I get it. I feel you. I'm here for you." They're trying to connect, but it's also hurtful inadvertently because they don't get it and they can't get it, but they don't realize that, and that can, if you're not careful navigating that, that can kind of break up a friendship.
For sure, because if stuff like that happens, I get quiet about it. I'm like, they're not going to truly understand the severity of it. So then I don't share, which then causes a bit of disconnect, right?
Right, exactly. So there's some education to be done there, some gentle education,
Yeah.
which is also kind of a burden on us. But yeah, that's some stuff about friendships. Anything else about friendships?
I love ending it on what you said, to have at least one friend. And that's where the internet is amazing. And that's why, my space on Instagram, Andrea's space, like I have some friends that I feel so deeply connected to like you, like my previous co-host Julie, and you become closer faster because you just share this experience. And so I
Yeah.
haven't met very many in real life, and it's very, very cool. I think it's actually been so healing for me. So if you're looking for that and you're like, I don't even think there's a bipolar person in my town, or a person
First of
that
all, there is.
lives with
Yes.
bipolar
Yes.
disorder, um, I'm going to edit that. You may be someone that thinks that I'm the only person that lives with bipolar disorder in my entire town. It is
Mhm.
probably not true.
Right.
And
It's not true.
yeah, find us on there. We always answer our messages. Sometimes it takes a while depending where we're at, but we will. So I love that you ended on that. I think that that's
Yeah.
really
Get
great.
yourself a bipolar bestie.
Yes.
Um, And so I think the last big category of relationships is family, which can be a really tricky subject. So family is a big trigger for you. Maybe now's where you want to send us a wave and say, "Bye, I don't want to listen to this part," which totally understand and respect,
Yep.
because family relationships are difficult even without bipolar. So add bipolar
100%.
and it can just be really, really hard.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, if this is something that's really triggering, it might be more helpful to come back to the next episode where we talk about things that help with that. That might be a little bit helpful. So yeah. Family,
Let
where
me say something about family is that, um, bipolar is highly genetic. And there is a chance that somebody else in your family also has bipolar, diagnosed or not diagnosed.
yeah,
So that can make things even more difficult, right?
yeah,
Trying to navigate who's going to be there for who and when and how and at what capacity and what can they
yeah.
do and what can't they do and what are they willing to do and where's the boundary, and it's a lot.
Yeah. I'm curious, uh, because you were diagnosed very young. I'm curious about, had you ever heard of bipolar or in your family? And how did your parents or caregivers that you lived with, I don't actually know this answer, but how did they react to it, or how did that go?
So I was the first in my family to get diagnosed. Upon examination, it turns out that there's a four-generation family history in my family, right? Goes
Yeah.
back to my, again, not diagnosed. If you hear people talk about, my grandmother, for example, my mom will say, "Oh, well, she didn't have bipolar. She would, sometimes she'd be up singing and vacuuming at like 2 a.m., and then she'd not get out of bed for 3 days." I'm like, okay, sure. Right? She wasn't diagnosed because, at that point in time, unless you were really completely non-functional, it was very hard to get a diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
So, and then my great grandmother, other problems, including some attempts on her life. So, and then some members of my family were diagnosed. There's a 4 generation history there. Can we pause? Can
Yep.
we redo that part? Because I want to like, I'm just realizing like maybe this isn't my information to share,
Yep.
like about my mom and stuff. So I
Yep.
might just cut it off at like there's a 4 gen. So what was the last thing you said?
We'll go to my question, like where I asked, did you know of people in your family history with bipolar disorder, and how did your parents react?
Right. So I will focus on that. I'll just say there's like a 4 generation family history because I would be like, oh, my great grandmother was found trying to hang herself. I'm like, that's not something I want to say.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
okay.
so pretend I asked the question and then now's your answer.
So actually, upon examination, even though I was the first to be diagnosed in my family, once we looked a little more closely, it turns out there is likely a 4 generation family history of bipolar in my family. Right. So that's a lot. So even though I was the first to get diagnosed, I wasn't the first to deal with it. I was just the first to be blessed with a diagnosis and some treatment.
Right.
Um, my parents reacted um, the best they could. How's
Yeah.
that? So they did the best they could. My dad had more of a like, pull yourself up by the bootstraps. He kind of had to learn about it and be educated. But then eventually, once he understood, I was very blessed to have both their support and their love and their sort of unconditional encouragement, which I'm really thankful for and very aware that that's not always the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And did they believe the diagnosis right away?
Yes. But my mom's first question to the doctor was, I'll never forget this, was, is she going to be taking these pills for the rest of her life? And the doctor, who I love this doctor, she saved my life so many times. But she was very sort of detached and clinical. And she just goes around, yes, of course, this is a lifelong condition. Which, okay, maybe there should have been a little padding there for this poor woman whose 14-year-old daughter showed up wanting to die, right? So, they
Yeah.
believed it, but I think it took them a little while to come around to the medication and that it is chronic. I mean, they didn't know this is the 90s. Like, what did we know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the same here, doing the best they can, right? And I know my mom listens because you're awesome mom, and I know you
Mm,
did the best you could. And also, no clue about mental health disorders. And I am the same upon reflection in our family that there is definitely some undiagnosed and some that, because of me getting help, have found a diagnosis. So
right.
I was the
And isn't that
first.
nice?
Yes, and I was the
Yeah.
first one in my family to seek that. And I think family dynamics, oh, my parents love hard and they're amazing. And I always believed that I could do whatever I could do, but there was always this underlying, I was the oldest, right? And I was the only girl. And also, all the rest of my family have similar personalities in that well, we're finding maybe that's not entirely, but they're very easygoing. My parents are like, time is not super important. And so you get this anxious child, right? And
Mm,
they moved all over. We didn't stay in one spot when I was like, when in my formative years when I was really young. And so I think all of this really affected me as a young child. And then also having so many brothers. And we had a time where dad was switching his career. He had to switch his career, and we didn't have a university in our town. And so he went away for like months at a time, weeks at a time, and coming back. So I had to really, I didn't do a great job at it, but as 16, I had to really do a lot of parental things along with my mom because my dad was gone. And so all of those things kind of play into it. But I think it was always joked about, or I always felt like the black sheep, but also it was like the drama queen, right? And so
mm,
I didn't, even though like my mom's an awesome listener, but I didn't feel fully understood. And I felt like my lifelong struggle with my family is trying to convince them to understand me. And the more I try, sometimes I feed into this drama that they talk about because I won't stop trying to explain it. And so, and I think because um and I've talked to my mom about this, like a family of carpet sweepers. And then I come along and I absolutely cannot sweep anything under the carpet. And that's very overwhelming for people that are used to not talking about things. And I felt like I was going to literally perish if we didn't talk about the things. So I think that that was probably tricky for them. And so I kind of, and it's gotten so much better with age and such. But I didn't think my brothers understood. And I actually think maybe my family was like a little bit scared of me, not because I was violent, but they didn't know what to do with my
Right. It was a new experience for
big
them.
feelings. Yeah. And I think too, um, yeah, as I can get before I could get bitter about that. And so that's my thing that I have two children. I have two daughters. They're 17, 19 now. And we talk very openly. They know about the podcast. They've actually talked about it. The future generation talks about mental health. It's really awesome.
Beautiful.
But yeah, there's family stuff for me in that the huge guilt of if I've passed things on. And also too, like when your mom has an anxious and nervous system, it's hard from your children to borrow calmness, right? And it wasn't always. And I can say that I am a good mom, and I think that people with bipolar disorder can be a good mom. But do I need to collect a little bit of a therapy fund? Probably, as all parents should for their children. But I think that I think we'll talk about this more in the tips and tricks, but I know that there are times that I do have to go back and apologize, and I do have to explain like that isn't really me, or I actually wasn't. Looking back, I'm not as frustrated as I came off. And one of my big triggers, and we can joke about it as a family now, but I really get put off by things getting wrecked or lost, and lost especially. And I am a blamer when I'm heightened. So I am mad at everyone. I am convinced that they have either hidden it or like, where did you put it? Or I remember it exactly there. And 90% of the time, I will find it where I have put it. And so we can joke about it now, but it's a real thing where I lose it, right? And I'm like not yelling at a person specifically, but at
Just yelling,
everything.
and there happened to be people there. Yeah.
Yeah, or panicking when we're leaving the house. So I'm sure that wasn't easy for them when they were kids, when I would just be like, instead of calmly getting out of the house, I'd be like, "Well, we gotta go." Ah." So,
Right.
so yeah,
So that's one, what you describe as kind of one scenario in which the person with bipolar has big feelings, as you say, maybe anxious, maybe dysregulated sometimes, and the rest of the family is not like that, is kind of the opposite. That's one type of friction. Another type of friction is when the whole family is like that, this
yeah,
high expressed emotion. Everybody has big feelings, everybody's heightened, everybody's anxious, everybody's yelly.
yeah.
That's more my background.
Okay, that's hard.
So that's another type of friction that I think, especially with the genetic link, that I think many people may experience, making family relationships in the context of bipolar even harder.
Yeah, yeah. And even mixed, right? So we're like half and half, too calm, too, and everybody says, "Oh, well, that must be so helpful for your daughter because you get it." I'm like, "Yes, and when we're both heightened, like it is not awesome."
Right.
So I think that it can be hard on children, but I just want to encourage people that I actually, even though there's one that we really rub up against each other, but we deeply love each other, and they still like choose to hang out with us, and they know that I have their back. And I also want to say too, like I think this is such a deeply embedded stigma because I remember my doctor specifically saying, "Oh, when I brought him information, like I really resonate with mood disorder." And he said, "You cannot have a doctor, GP, so can't be good at everything. I get that." But said, "Well, you can't be because you have a husband, two children, and a degree. So you don't have bipolar disorder because people with bipolar disorder don't have that." And I think that if anything through this episode, even though we talk about the hard things, I want to break that and I want to push back against that because we, with our big emotions, we have deep feelings and we have, we are, loyal and love our people.
Yes. Yes, we have so much to offer. You can't, I just went silent because I didn't know what to say to that story. Sort of just all of my thoughts turned off because that's a terrible thing to hear. I'm so sorry you had to hear that.
Thank you.
And that is a huge misconception, a huge stigma, and it's not true.
Oh,
So it's not true that you can't have good times with your family. It's not true that you can't have meaningful friendships. It's not true that you can't find a partner who you love and who loves you back as you are. None
as
of
you
those
are.
things are true. It's just that we have to be self-aware enough to navigate some of the hurdles.
Yeah. And I remember, you know, I don't have a very awesome doctor, but here in Canada, like a lot of people, you can't get a doctor. So I just stick with him because he's good at other stuff. But he also was like, said something once about your poor husband. And I want to be reminded, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. And my therapist, I remember going through this with her. I want to remind everybody that a lot of people, other people have things, right? We tend to think like, oh, the person with bipolar is, the problem in the relationship. They make everything hard. People bring all their issues, right? Like it, it is
Yeah.
it, right? And I think also, I remember my therapist saying sometimes it's a bonus to the relationship because when we are, managing or when we are seeking wellness in all the
Mhm.
ways, we're actually more self-aware than maybe our
Yeah.
partner or our because we're forced to be.
Right. And I don't want anybody to walk away thinking that they're a burden. That's not a thing. It might be true that sometimes you and your partner, or you and your friend, or you and your family member have to work a little harder to navigate, but that could be true of so many things that people are dealing with. Physical disabilities, right?
Yeah,
Missing limbs, like anything, right? So that
yeah,
doesn't make you a burden. It means this is your hand of cards you've been dealt and you are dealing with it, and the people who love you
yeah,
are helping you deal with it.
yeah, exactly. And I think, yeah, if you're listening and you're a partner, I think one of the biggest questions is how can I support? And I think one of the biggest things that I say is um model taking care of yourself,
Mm,
instead of trying to fix us, like you go to your therapy, you make sure you do, you know what I mean? And
mhm.
then I think learning about it as well. But yeah, I think that I get caught in the whole I'm the problem, and that's not always the case. And I think, I don't know, the bipolar besties that I've met, their self-awareness just blows me away, and I've learned so much, which is, seeped into goodness into all my relationships.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, so next time, what's on
Yeah.
the docket for next time?
So, what we want to talk about is we just put out there all the things that could be problems or things that, impact relationships with living with bipolar disorder. And we didn't want this episode to be 100 hours long. So, we thought that we would split it up because some people are already very self-aware of all these problems and want to hear things that we
Now
do.
what? Yeah.
Yeah, and exactly. And it's amazing because I have a ton of personal experience, and Andrea is a survivor and thriver of bipolar disorder, but she also knows all the psychology things. So I
Oh,
think that,
wow, that's not a lot to live up to.
okay, she knows things, okay? Andrea knows things. Let's just go with that. And so I think that it will be a really helpful episode for me, for you, for all of us. And so go and listen to that when it comes out. And Andrea, just want to thank you for
Oh,
being
thank
a
you.
bipolar friend. I think too, one of the things that we'll really talk about is Andrea is and I can say this, it's not something you have to live up to because you are an expert in self-stigma. And I think that that can tie a lot into our next episode because I think that really affects relationships. And I'm excited to hear your thoughts and your ideas because we WhatsApp all the time and I'll say something and Andrea can really help me reframe it or remind me that that is actually self stigma. And yeah, so
Call
thank
me
you
the
for that.
self-stigma police. So
Yes, it's amazing. It's amazing. And so, yeah, thank you for being here with me, Andrea. It is always
thank you for having me, bipolar bestie.
bipolar besties. And message us, and we will be your bipolar bestie too, because
Yes. So yours is this dot is dot bipolar and mine is best dot life dot bipolar. We've got all
we
our
love
dots.
we love our dots.
All
And
right. Thank you.
thank you very much. Thanks for listening, friends. This is Bipolar.